Hello and a warm welcome to the AI with Arun Show. In this episode, we are going to talk about the future of auditing. If you want to discover how AI is automating the most tedious parts of financial compliance, radically speeding up SOX testing, and transforming the role of auditors, then this is the right show for you. This conversation will change your perspective on what is possible with automation. Because my guest today is Kieran Taylor, who is the co founder and CEO of Midship, a San Francisco based startup that's pioneering the AI driven automation for SOX compliance and financial audits. He has a background in engineering roles at Instacart, Amazon, and Deloitte, and is known for delivering powerful automation and data solutions. At Midship, he is leading the mission to reduce weeks of manual testing to hours, redefining efficiency and accuracy in the audit world. So, Kieran, a very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Let's get started with the vision behind Midship. So, what was the key insight or gap, Kieran, that you saw in the audit process that led to the creation of this company?
Yeah, originally what piqued my interest was whilst working at Instacart, working alongside the internal audit team for the 2 years prior to our IPO process. I just noticed there was a lot of inefficiencies that happened actually between the engineering and audit teams themselves. So I used to spend a lot of time on my engineering documentation inside of Confluence. I was very, very proud of it. I would often get questions from both other engineers, internal auditors, and everyone who was basically asking things that could have been answered just from that documentation itself. Kind of piqued my interest and think, hey, there must be some broken communication channel here that is stopping these answers from being taken from the stuff I've spent so much time on. So kind of piqued my interest into the space at first. As that was happening, the chat moment was happening where everyone was realizing that AI kind of hit this inflection point, this big step change in its capabilities. And we started thinking beyond just, will someone go and read my Confluence documents? How can you apply this technology in really interesting ways to try and accelerate audit workloads? And that was really the background of how we came about with the idea of what we're working on with Midship.
That's like a very interesting way to start a company. I'm aware that ChatGPT has inspired a lot of founders to create companies that have been very successful and are solving very specific problems, such as you are solving the auditing problem. Auditing has been seen as resistant to automation, right? I don't know if many people auditors would agree with me, but that's historically what we have seen. So why did you think that this is the right time for AI to transform it?
Yeah, I think the perception that auditors have as resistant to automation is probably a little bit unfairly taken. And I think that it's very much the perception side of the industry itself as well. And really, it is because the role is fundamentally difficult to automate without the kind of AI technology that we have available today. So you can imagine if you're an auditor coming to an engineering team asking, what is the process where our financial data is reported from start to finish, back to front? And then for them to be able to actually properly automate the process of auditing it, they actually need to have the same level of understanding and the same access to the underlying engineering systems as the engineers on that team have as well. And for that to say is that there are so many different exception cases and so many different ways which a process can be correct from a business level, but deviate what you have programmatically configured in some kind of testing automation. It's very, very, very difficult for an auditor to do that without some flexible, intelligent system like we have available today with modern LLM systems to be able to actually automate that processing. So we've really found since we've given them the tooling to be able to automate more of those processes with AI at its core, that they are actually not resistant at all. They're very, very willing to kind of work with us to try and help do that because, of course, it's going to make their life easier and mean that they can move on to high value tasks as well. So I actually have a little bit of a different take on that.
Okay. All right. No, that's very interesting. You claim that, as we were doing our research, right? So we saw that there is information that Midship performs SOX testing autonomously. So if you can walk our viewers through what does that look like? First, just talk to us about viewers, about people who are not intimately familiar. What is SOX testing in the first place, right? And how is your product automating it?
Yeah, absolutely. So SOX testing, SOX, refers to the Sarbanes-Oxley, which is a yearly requirement, or actually a financial requirement which companies have once they go public to both. So it was legislation that was brought in 2003. Prior to 2003, companies were required to report their financial statements on a yearly and quarterly basis to the SEC inside the US if you were public. Post 2003, post the Enron crisis, there was an additional requirement which was put onto public companies of a certain size. We said, instead of just having to publish your financial reports and have them attested to by an external audit firm, you also have to attest to the fact that you have proper internal controls over your financial reporting. So if you have a data pipeline, which goes from order all the way to it making it to the line item on a financial report, which goes to the SEC, you have to be able to prove to us and attest to the fact that that pipeline has proper controls over it to make sure that it is accurate and complete. So that is the basics for what you have to do for SOX. So a very pinpoint example of what that might look like is if you go back and you want to make sure that anybody who has access to a financially sensitive data system is properly authorized to actually have that access. The auditor will go in and say, for that control to be in place, let's say that the company is using Oracle, we want to look back at the last 10 requests that were made to access that financially sensitive data inside of Oracle. They're then going to go through and just make sure that the proper procedures and process was actually followed to grant that person access. The proper sign-offs happened. It wasn't themselves who was both the approver and the person requesting the access. There's a couple of these checks which happen. And a typical public company has 300 to 400 of these individual controls, which they need to test for on a quarterly and yearly basis for that SOX program. That's kind of the background for what is happening today. And what is happening pre-midship is a lot of those controls are very, very difficult to test in an automated manner. So for that one in particular, which I highlighted, if someone needs access to a financially sensitive Oracle DB, the proper path for doing it may be that they raise a JIRA ticket, a finance manager goes in and signs off on it, and then they are granted access post that. What can very easily happen is instead of commenting on the JIRA ticket saying approved from the finance manager, someone actually gets an approval via Slack. And so if you build a workflow from the audit perspective, which programmatically always has to look at JIRA, look for a comment, find the string approved, it's not able to kind of adapt to those deviances and variances in the approval workflow itself. So all of that is to say, when we're saying that we work on this autonomously, we give the AI agent the functional outcome that the auditors care about, which is, was this business process properly followed? And we allow it to take its own path in figuring out were those constraints met and were those attributes held. So that is like the first level of automation, which is from the testing side itself, can the agent actually intelligently think and intelligently plan how to test that what you care about at the business level is happening at the execution level. Beyond that, there are a couple of steps which we are moving towards for an autonomous world as well, which is as you go and collect the evidence, which gives you the evidence for that business process itself, can you build AI agents that autonomously do that? And then there is this third level goal, way beyond what we're doing today, which is instead of on a quarterly, annually SOX cycle, a quarterly or annual SOX cycle, going and doing this process, can you have an AI agent which kind of sits in the background and autonomously works night and day for you to continuously monitoring these controls? And we're definitely not there today. There's some step function changes which are required in the AI models to get there. But those are the kind of three levels which we think about at Midship from an autonomy point of view.
Wow, that's a really interesting way you described it, Kieran. The way you're able to go from step 1 to step 2, and in the future to step 3. That's probably what businesses need. Not to be able to do these periodically, quarterly or annually, as the case might be, but to do it in near real time, so that you know that you are working per the controls laid down by a controllership on a real time basis. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
fantastic. And Kieran, are there other existing audit automation tools that exist in the market? And if at all there are, how do you guys differentiate yourself from them, given that you're a newer company?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, there's plenty of people in the space, and there's a couple of different players who we kind of benchmark ourselves against. So the ones people will be very familiar with, Audit Board, Workiva, some of the traditional players, they're introducing similar tooling from like a 30,000 foot perspective, where it's introducing AI to help out with that testing process. And really the benefit which we have is building tooling from the ground up with agentic AI capabilities in mind. We think about it very, very similarly to the advantage which those companies had themselves when they were first offering SaaS applications delivered via the web versus some of the traditional on-prem deployments which they were looking to disrupt, where everybody is still going to move towards the same world. But from that starting point where you have the freedom to design an application which is built AI native from the ground up with those capabilities in mind, we just have a lot more flexibility about properly supporting those workflows. Obviously, being an earlier stage company, we have a little bit more latitude in terms of the speed which we can execute at as well. So that is the main kind of differentiation between us and those people, everyone will be familiar with.
Yeah, you guys are certainly much more agile than any of your larger counterparts or competitors. That makes sense. You spoke about the AI agents earlier. So let's do a deep dive in the segment about the technology and the AI architecture. So when we talk about AI models or AI agents, how are they actually? Talk to our viewers actually a little bit more detail about them, and particularly How are they powering your automation?
Absolutely. So we use a mixture of proprietary models and API based from the top leading AI labs, a lot of the models. So OpenAI, Anthropic, people will be very familiar with them. The proprietary models are mainly used for very task specific things where we have a really clear view that it's actually worth spending time on developing those and applying them to places where there's operational characteristics which are required to hit. Usually that means you need to perform operations really, really quickly. Anything which requires, I use this in air quotes, but maximum intelligence, using the models from the leading AI labs definitely has a clear advantage at the moment, just because they have a very clear leading advantage on the kind of hard to pin down, and why I'm using air quotes, intelligence factor, which we care about. And so from the agentic side, what it really looks like is we are building the right tooling for the agent to actually interact and issue commands and properly understands the documentation which the auditors are also interacting with. So very, very concretely, what that looks like is if you have a PDF of an invoice and you have an Excel document, which is a month-end journal entry close, we want to give the agent the same tooling that a human auditor would use to actually interact with it. So you can imagine if a human auditor is going into a workbook and searching for a single row, pulling that out, screenshotting it, and placing it in a work paper at the end of the day, we need the AI agent to be able to have that exact same tooling to be able to actually interact with it, pull back the evidence, and give it back to the human in such a way that's easily understandable and digestible and reviewable as well. Make sure that there is, it's not this black box process which is happening. It's very clear understandability and a cookie crumb trail of evidence of what is actually happening step by step as well. So really a lot of the work for us goes into building kind of the ergonomics and the tooling for the agent itself, and then the application for reviewing and interacting with the work that the agent is performing.
And Kieran, so many of these standards, right, like the internal audit and the PCAOB, these standards, they require your reporting to be in a certain specific formats, right, and templates. So are your agents able to comply with those kinds of standards?
Yeah, we really push the problem back towards our users, where it's kind of like they are the arbiters and the people who are driving that compliance with those standards. And so giving them the tooling and a flexible platform where they can properly model what they're doing to be in compliance is really the key for us, because we don't claim to be able to know what the company needs to do to a better standard than the auditors themselves. And we really, really view it in the same way that something like Cursor is applied for software engineers. Cursor would never pretend to be the arbiters of what is the best practice for some coding standard in Python or Scala. In the same way, we don't pretend to be the best standard for doing that in the audit world. And really it is tooling which accelerates the workloads of human auditors as opposed to replacing them end to end. And with that in mind, we can really lean on their human expertise and judgment when it comes to those kind of matters.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, so you are really empowering all the users so that they have everything at their disposal and use these AI agents the way they want to, and then meet with these requirements.
Exactly, yeah.
Excellent. There are two things that are standing out, right? One is AI transparency, and the other one is explainability, right? Particularly when you're working with regulated industries, SOX compliance extremely important. Not to say that it's not important for other industries, but how are you handling particularly those kinds of requirement sets?
Yeah, for us, those are much more rote and repeatable in terms of from customer to customer, where once you've understood, everybody wants to make sure that they're not doing anything weird. And it's like, once you've been through this a couple of times with people who are of a similar size public company, and you can show that here are the steps we took to stay compliant, here's the things which they cared about, here's the security reviews, you kind of give them that assurance and comfort. We've been through this a couple of times. It's actually very repeatable in terms of steps that you need to take there. So the most obvious ones are you have 0 data retention agreements in place with any of those base AI model providers that we use. So none of the data is persisted. Because none of the data is persisted, there's no risk of the model of models being trained on the data. We have standard DPA agreements in place with each of our customers as well. So that stuff is funny because I think everybody comes into it thinking that they have these very highly specialized requirements that we're going to need to do a lot of work to comply with. But usually it's actually pretty rote between different customers.
All right, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. And how challenging was it to design these kinds of systems? Because your problem is that there are existing audit workflows that your existing customers have, but there are also tools like Excel and Audit Board that you have to work with. So all of these together, how difficult was it to design these kinds of systems?
Yeah, I think the most difficult part is just we're not auditors by trade or by background. So it was really going headfirst into the industry and trying to understand, put those users first and say, hey, you guys are the experts. Can you help us with understanding what the workflow should look like? So really just being honest and being transparent with them and understanding, hey, where we are experts and where we are bringing our expertise is actually building these ergonomic AI-based applications for you. You're the guys who are going to be able to help us with actually building this specifically for auditors. So finding good design partners really early on to help us with that process was absolutely critical with bringing that legitimacy to the application, also some of the design feedback that we needed there. So really finding good early design partners was absolutely key. Otherwise, it would have been probably impossible.
Yeah. Cool. Kieran, do you have any example of a control test that you did where your AI was significantly able to reduce time without losing accuracy? Any example that you could share with our viewers?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot which come up very repeatedly. One of the ones which comes up almost every single time we do a POC is change management testing. So what it looks like, people unfamiliar, is you want to look back and say every single pull request which was raised into a code base and integrated into the production deployment was properly tested in some way and properly signed off on. And it's a pretty laborious process where you'll often have a lot of different touch points along a lot of different teams. And so you'll say, hey, for this change, which went into the application on September 20th, we had a JIRA ticket which was raised for the request. We had the security review performed by the security team. We had some user acceptance testing performed by a different team. We had integration testing performed by the engineering team. There's all these different touch points you have to hit there. And once you have the documentation pulled back from that, there's also a lot of technical language and code examples which you use there. So that is something where the AI agents really shine, where they understand the source content itself is very highly structured in terms of what they're actually testing for. And that is a use case where every time it comes up in a POC, we're always very excited and happy to see, because we know we're going to knock it out of the park.
Yeah, you guys are indeed knocking the ball out of the park for sure. Yes. On that note, let's talk about impact and the customer outcomes. So we read that Midship can cut testing time from 16 hours, right, which is roughly 2 days, to 12 minutes. Is that real?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I mean, once you've seen, I think actually we were of the same mindset as well. Of we would go through this process, get to the 12 minutes and say, okay, teams, how long would this have taken you originally? And they'll say 16 hours. We're like, that can't really be right, can it? And then you look through and actually try and do this by hand. And you go through that process of the best way of learning what auditors do is to try and actually do their work for them. Once you go through that process by hand, you understand how laborious it is. It really is very clear the time savings which you have. I think that was one of the processes where when we tried it ourselves, we really realized we were onto something because of the crazy time savings which you can get there. So very much real numbers.
Yeah, so I wanted to highlight that to my viewers. That's something that used to take you, if you're from an audit background, 2 days. And here is something that you could actually take a restroom break or a coffee break, and when you're back, in 10 to 12 minutes, it's done. So it's the power that this tool brings for you. That's fantastic. And how receptive have the audit teams been to adopting AI agents? I mean, you mentioned earlier that they're accepting, but what are some of the challenges that you have seen compared to manual processes?
Yeah, I think from the problem statement and the longer term mission statement of what we're working towards, like I said, people are super receptive. They understand that there is an industry-wide push towards this and kind of the possibilities out there. I think the biggest hesitation is around from external auditors. So again, for people who aren't aware, what an internal audit team will do is a lot of the same work that for Sarbanes-Oxley, at the end of the process, you have an external audit team come in and actually need to sign off on those same internal controls, which I was mentioning earlier. So you have the internal team prior to that happening, performing the same testing work the external auditors will. Some of that work gets handed over one for one, and the external auditors do something which we call reliance in the industry. But really what that looks like is if your work is being relied on by an external auditor, you need to make sure that they're going to accept any change in the process that you use to produce that one. So for auditors, they will create working papers, which are the Excel tables which have the testing which we've been describing so far. And if the external auditor says, no, we can't use this because there's been some change in the process, that's a huge blocker to it happen. Very naturally, there was some hesitation around, will the external auditors actually accept this or not? I think the biggest unlock for us has been that we know all of those external auditors from the Big Four are all working on applications like this internally and starting to roll out kind of their version of Midship internally as well. So it's very easy for us to say, hey, if you guys are building it and you're deploying it, why can't we build it and deploy it as well? And that's a big unlock for us. But definitely that was the biggest hesitation for teams early on.
Yeah, you're right. Because AI is everywhere, including the audit firm. So I do see news reports of all the Big Four companies trying to pick something like this. And what metrics or KPI define success for an AI audit solution, other than, of course, the time to reduce it from 2 days to 12 minutes?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think so. One of the questions, and maybe to have some background thinking on this, but one of the questions we get very frequently is around accuracy. And obviously, the key metrics that we care about are accuracy beyond just the time savings itself. And when it comes to accuracy, there's a couple of different things which we tell teams to think about. And I think traditionally teams will think about it in confidence percentiles, where it's, hey, I'm used to using OCR software, which reads characters off of a page. Like, how accurate is the AI model at doing those? And it's easy to actually build evaluation benchmarks, which can give you precise numbers there. The way we found it is it's much more likely to be kind of 0% accurate or 100% accurate on the first couple of tries, which you do, because the AI agents we build are totally dependent on the control documentation, which an audit team has already got established. If the documentation is off and the agent is, you can think of it as misaligned, then it's not going to get to the correct answer. It's going to get to the wrong answer 100% of the time. If it's properly aligned, it will get to the correct answer kind of 100% of the time. So that is like from the base stakes of when a customer is coming on board, we obviously try and get them to think in those terms. Beyond that, in all machine learning problems, you have to think about it in true negatives, true positives, false negatives, false positives. And so a true negative in our case is that we've said there is no issue with the sample, there's no deficiency, and no issue that we're looking at. A true positive will say that, hey, there is actually an issue which we flagged here. There is some discrepancy in the sample. You need to go and investigate this further. A false positive for us would be saying, hey, there is an issue which we found, but the auditor goes in and checks it, and it's actually there's no issue because the AI agent's come to a wrong conclusion. A false negative is the worst possible case, where we've said there's no issue with this sample, everything is okay, go ahead, but the auditor on a second look will go into it, review it, and realize that there actually was something that we should have flagged. So all of that is to say is that because there's an outsized risk to one of those four over the others, we really try and bias the system very much towards over-indexing on false positives, as opposed to having any kind of chance for false negatives there as well. And so what it looks like is that if you think about it in overall accuracy measures, it may not be, there's no clear mental model for how you do that. If you really think about during the evaluation of midship, I'm going to look to see if there's any false negatives. That's the number which you really, really care about. That's what audit teams at the end of the day care about as well. And that is our KPI for kind of driving application performance.
Very interesting. Again, once you have onboarded a customer, they are convinced that this is the right solution to use for audit automation. How long does it take to implement?
It can be really, really quick if you have the control documentation in place. So for teams who have very well-written control descriptions, test procedures, and attributes, we have AI tooling that can help import that into Midship, get it running on a sample, and outputting results in under 15 minutes. So on the first call, when we're doing an introduction, if we have data which we can work with from the customer, very, very quick to get going with it. If you don't have quite as rigorous documentation, there's some manual work required there. It can take between 1 to 2 hours for that first control to get running. But we've seen it actually more likely to be that 15-minute case as opposed to the 1 to 2 hours. And obviously you look to try and scale that across a 300 control program. You can kind of do the multiples in your head, see what it would look like for a full rollout.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. So let's talk about the future of AI in auditing. Kieran. So do you see a world where end-to-end audits are fully autonomous with human oversight only for review?
I think definitely. I think everybody knows that that is what we're working towards. And I think the last thing you said there is really the key, which is with still humans in the loop to review the work at the end of the day. I think it is extremely unlikely that we get to a world where it's fully autonomous, results are published to the SEC and no one's in the loop to check that. But in terms of the actual end-to-end procedural work itself, once those test procedures are well defined, there's absolutely no reason why an AI agent, if given proper access to all of the source systems it needs access to, couldn't perform that work end to end. So 100% that's possible.
Very interesting. And in that world, how do you see, or what skill do you see the auditors would need to be doing whatever they'll be doing in 5 years from now?
Yeah, I think I probably have a slightly, I'm not sure if it's quite a hot take, but a different take from some people in the industry, where I think the natural inclination is as technology becomes more sophisticated, auditors will need to upskill in the technology itself to be able to properly utilize it. I actually think that particularly with AI tooling, as the capabilities progress, the skills which the auditor will require is better understanding of the business process itself. Because like I said, all of the work that an AI agent is performing is dependent on the control documentation that an auditor has been responsible for creating. And so properly documenting that and getting that aligned correctly really requires deep expertise of the business process that you're auditing. So if it's the case where you're involved in IT controls and you need to deeply understand the code and the architecture that you're looking at, maybe that will involve better technical skills as well. But for auditors who aren't involved in just those applications, there's no need necessarily for the actual technical side of it. It's really about becoming an expert in the business domain that you're looking at.
Yeah. And, as we discussed earlier, possibly in that model, there would be continuous monitoring and assurance, right? Rather than periodic testing.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's going to help a lot with audit team workloads a lot. It's one of the questions which I ask audit leaders when I speak to them a lot, which is kind of what are the benefits of continuous monitoring beyond just the, hey, we're here today and we move to up here on the graph. And a lot of it comes back to audit teams are very overworked today. And a lot of that is because there's a huge crunch time at the end of a quarter or the end of an annual cycle. Kind of distributing that over the space of a year is going to be a huge benefit for those teams as well.
Yeah. So a very broad question, Kieran. So what role would generative AI play in understanding or synthesizing financial narratives from raw data?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, with the technical skills itself, as the AI tooling gets more sophisticated, the kind of things which you can do without the technical understanding of data analytics and coding and programming software engineering becomes much more sophisticated as well. So if you have auditors who want to apply analytical procedures, analytical techniques to raw data sets and financial statements, they're going to be able to do that by just describing in natural language what they're trying to do. And really the unlock for doing that properly is going to be that business understanding and the understanding of the business domain itself and being able to properly formulate that in natural language. Once you can do that and the AI agent understands the technical side of it, then you're going to be off to the races to be able to do a bunch of extra work, which isn't possible today, only because there is that limitation on technical resources.
Got it. And last question, how are you expecting regulation to evolve to accommodate AI agents in compliance testing?
Yeah, this is one we think about a lot. So I think one of the more obvious pieces is as the capabilities for audit teams increase and the amount of work which they can perform increases, some of that capability and capacity will just get soaked up by additional regulatory requirements. So there is this idea inside the audit world of reasonable assurance, which is that you have to always balance the amount of testing work and the amount of audit work you were doing with what is actually possible to do within a year's audit cycle without being kind of onerous on the business. As audit teams are able to do more with less, that expectation of reasonable assurance will probably increase as well. I think beyond that, it's really going to be moving away from just the assurance side of the world into the advisory side of the audit role. So really, and this is actually one of the things which, when I speak to audit leaders, they really want to happen, which is that instead of it just being a box ticking exercise for did things happen last year, how we expected them to happen, actually proactively looking forwards over the space of the next year and saying, these are the programs and projects which we think we need to launch to help and improve our risk environment internally. And I think that the regulators are very clear, like keenly aware of that. And there will actually be some pressure on teams to kind of explore those roles and have that proactive work happening to help with that control environment internally as well.
Yeah, that's a very interesting answer. And, it remains to be seen how compliance is going to evolve, regulation is going to evolve to meet the AI needs. Wonderful. So, Kate, with that, we move to the next round, which is the rapid fire round.
Absolutely. Sounds good.
All right. So here's my first question to you. What is one word that best describes the future of auditing?
Effortless.
Effortless. All right. That's exactly what you guys are trying to do with your customers. So the second one I have, what is the biggest myth about AI in compliance?
Ooh, this is a good one. I think what I'm speaking to earlier around as these technical systems get more complex, that compliance professionals need to become more technical in their role in order to excel and succeed. I really think that is the case. It's actually the opposite in some cases.
Interesting. The third one, I mean, you have been through the Y Combinator thing, right? What is the one advice from Y Combinator that stuck with you?
There is a lot of these actually. This is a rich pick. I think doing things that don't scale as an early maturity business is really, really powerful in that. When you come from working at Amazon Instacart, you think a lot about what process do I need to put in place to enable this thing to happen? And you think much less about how do I very quickly get a product off the ground by just doing things manually myself. That was super powerful for us early on. And I think longer term, and maybe I'm giving you two of these. I know Gary Tan often tweets around like, you can just do things, kind of not thinking so much about what barriers are in place for me to go and achieve something, and just having the mindset that if I use my force of will to go after a problem, I can usually solve it by some measure of force of will. I think that has been something which, as again, we work with audit teams, and they think very much in terms of conservative, risk-based thinking. And you realize that, hey, you can actually just change the world with enough force of will in place. That's something which we think about a lot going into next year.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting. What is one book or podcast that every AI founder should follow?
So I think that there's one very obvious answer, which is AI with Arun Show.
Thank you.
Of course, the easiest answer of today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And then the last one I have for you, what is next for Midship in 2026, next year?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest focuses for us is expanding our team and looking what it looks like to scale a team. So we've been doing a lot with a very small elite team, which we have today. And as we look and scale the business, really making sure that we keep that elite status for the team, whilst also scaling up and kind of figuring out how to integrate new people into their roles. That's going to be the biggest thing for us. It's probably the most exciting thing that I'm thinking about.
Well, that's great. Kieran, that was the last question. But before I let you go, two questions for you. One is, how do you guys license, or do you guys let company subscribe to the business? That's number one. Mm-hmm. And second question is, what skills do you typically hire for? You mentioned that you want to scale.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first question is around kind of what is the seat model like on Midship?
Yeah,
absolutely. So we don't actually gate the product via seats. The way which the pricing works is from the number of controls which you're looking to test. And really the reason we did that is because we want the price that you pay with Midship to scale with the value which you're getting back from it, and that to be as one-to-one as possible. A couple other options which you considered, but we found that to be the closest proxy to the scale which you get back. And I think from the skills which you look for in people, actually close alignment with some of those YC values of not being too process driven and just being very, very laser focused on, here is an outcome, what is the quickest path for me to get to that? Not thinking too much around, I'm not sure the right way of phrasing this is, but the negative mindset of things that we can't do versus things that we can get done today. I need a better pithy way of saying that, but that's the kind of mindset which we're thinking of from Midship.
Wonderful, Kieran. That brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for talking to our viewers, and this has been such an insightful session.
Of course, absolutely. Enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thank you, Kieran, and good luck for the next phase.
Thank you.